Hello, everyone, and good morning. Thanks for joining us today. So we have Ayya Soma, who will be sharing and talking about the Cala Sutta with us. So you can click the link in the live chat if you'd like to follow along. And if at any time you have questions, feel free to type them in. And welcome so far to Geeta, Poonam, Jess, and Ron, and all our other friends who are just viewing right now. So I'll turn things over to Ayya Soma for Sutta study.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Bhante Sumano, and thank you all for joining us to study the suttas. So we can start by paying homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Uttam Nam Sangham Namasami. So this morning, as Venerable Sumano mentioned, we're going to read from the Bhikkhuni Samyutta, so the Cala Sutta in particular. And as I like to do normally, we can start by reading the entire sutta first, to contemplate it by ourselves for a few seconds, and then go through it line by line. All right. So it starts. At Savati. Then in the morning, the Bhikkhuni Cālā, dressed and taking bowl and robe, entered Savati for alms. When she had walked for alms in Savati and had returned from her alms round, after her meal she went to the blind man's grove for the day's abiding. Having plunged into the blind man's grove, she sat down at the foot of a tree for the day's abiding. Then Māra, the evil one, approached the Bhikkhuni Cālā and said to her, "What don't you approve of, Bhikkhuni?" "I don't approve of birth, friend." "Why don't you approve of birth? Once born, one enjoys sensual pleasures. Who now has persuaded you of this? Bhikkhuni, don't approve of birth?" And the Bhikkhuni Cālā says, "For one who is born, there is death. Once born, one encounters sufferings. Bondage, murder, affliction. Hence, one shouldn't approve of birth. The Buddha has taught the Dhamma, the transcendence of birth. For the abandoning of all suffering, he has settled me in the truth. As to those beings who fare amidst form, and those who abide in the formless, not having understood cessation, they come again to renewed existence." Then Māra, the evil one, realizing the Bhikkhuni Cālā knows me, sat and disappeared right there. We can contemplate for a few moments. So much Dhammasuka. I love all the suttas. And in particular, in the Bhikkhuni Samyutta, they're so short and full and dense of Dhamma, and so beautifully written and very inspiring. So I always have lots of Dhammasuka whenever I read them. So as we had seen a few weeks back with the Soma Sutta, where I get my name, so we see that in the Bhikkhuni Samyutta, the sort of pattern is the same. So there's always one of the bhikkhunis that goes into the wilderness, namely the blind man's grove, which the commentary was telling us, as we saw last time, how it has that interesting name because apparently back in the day it was a place where both bhikkhus and bhikkhunis were practicing, and apparently in the past one of the bhikkhunis was assaulted, or one of it wasn't even a bhikkhuni, it was just a practitioner, a female practitioner with a very well-developed mind, was physically assaulted, and the people who assaulted her had an instant, the results of their sort of instant bad karma appear, and they lost their sight. So it became known as the blind man's grove, which is quite interesting, because then we see how all the bhikkhunis enter the blind man's grove and are assaulted in a different way by by Māra, the tempter, who comes and insinuates a lot of different thoughts, or asks questions, trying to get the bhikkhunis to veer from concentration. And as we know, Māra has a lot of different. We can take the figure of Māra to be both a literal figure, so like someone who has an existence of their own, so to speak. So a figure who comes and tempts us and tries to stray us from the path. But it can also be seen as our sort of mind. So our defilements popping up and straying us away from our object of meditation, or our aspirations to pursue the wholesome, our aspirations to attain awakening. Whatever it is, Māra comes and tempts us. And it's not unique to us. We're nothing special. It's been going on since the history of time, and definitely in the past 2,500 years, whether it's fully awakened beings, or beings at some sort of stage of awakening, or people who have just encountered the path, or who haven't even encountered the path at all. So we're all in the same sort of boat, except that the awakened beings see Māra straight away. So this is the case of Bhikkhuni Cālā, as well as all the bhikkhunis in the Bhikkhuni Samyutta. The commentaries tell us that Bhikkhuni Cālā was actually one of the sisters, if I remember correctly, of Venerable Sariputta, one of the chief disciples of the Buddha. And actually both Cālā, Upacālā, and Sisupacālā, which are also the subsequent suttas here in the Bhikkhuni Samyutta, so the names of the monastics, they were all sisters. And Cālā was apparently the oldest ones. So that family had really good karmic conditions, because apparently they attained all arhathood. So as Cālā is going about her day, focusing, concentrating the mind and practicing, Māra appears and asks her a simple question, as we've seen. And she has a really interesting reply that Bhante smiled as soon as he heard. "I don't approve of birth." How very particular as an answer. I see a lot of, here at the audience at Empty Cloud, there's a lot of thumbs up. "I don't approve of birth." And Māra, replies, "Why don't you approve of birth? That sounds really weird. I mean, once born, one enjoys sensual pleasures." Which is so interesting. So how all of a sudden, at least at the beginning of our practice, we kind of sound like Māra, or all of our friends who are not really into Buddhist practice. So they're all sounding pretty much like Māra, don't they? Like, birth, that's so great. That is so wonderful. In this country, they also have, what are they called? Baby showers before birth. I am originally from Italy, born and bred in Italy. We don't have baby showers there. And my mom came here because my brother had a baby here in the US, has been here for quite some years. And she was like, "What are they doing? I don't understand. Why are they having a party before the baby is born? The baby could die." like there could be complications. What a bizarre thing. These people are crazy. And I was like, Mom, actually, it's like a tradition here in the US. It's not my brother that is trying to celebrate birth before birth happens. But it gives us, whether we celebrate it, we perhaps don't celebrate it ahead of time, the birth, but we definitely celebrate it not the day of, but a little shortly thereafter. I think in Italy, what we celebrate is baptism, I think. I'm not quite sure because I didn't have children. And I was the youngest one. So not quite sure, not up to date on that camp. But I know it's also a big thing where I come from, just at a sort of later time. But we can see how we normally approach these concepts in our minds. We're like, birth, yay, death, oh. So we don't, we've had some deaths here at the monastery that our chicken friends were killed in September, and there was a lot of grief. Nobody celebrated here. Yet, if Yama, our surviving chicken, if we heard, these days she's hanging out with roosters. So if we heard that she had children, probably our instinctive reaction would go like, oh, cute, oh, good for Yama, oh, yay, celebration. Yet Bhikkhuni Cālā tells us she does not approve of birth. Oh, very interesting. And Māra is like, someone clearly must have persuaded you of this like really bizarre thought, which could also be pretty much anyone. Like if I told this sort of statement, Mom, I do not approve of birth, she would probably go, who on earth persuaded you of this crazy thing? It must be Bhante Sudazo, the guru that strayed you away from the lay life and brainwashed you, right? Because it sounds so bizarre. It goes so counter to anything that we are taught and that we're raised with in the world, that it sounds like one of the most bizarre statements. And here the Bhikkhuni Cālā explains a little bit better. And she says, for one who is born, there is death. Once born, one encounters sufferings, bondage, murder, affliction. Hence, one shouldn't approve of birth. As Bhante Sudazo likes to say, buy one birth, get one death free. So when we're celebrating birth, we're oblivious about what we're signing up to, what it entails. And it's not even just death, but everything in between, which is sorrow, lamentation, despair, bondage, murder. Fundamentally, in a nutshell, the first noble truth. The acknowledgement that there is, in fact, suffering. And it's when we think about the state of the world these days, in terms of actually the apocalyptic climate change that is happening, the precarious nature of the planet that we live in. Yet it's remarkable how many tendencies we see in others and ourselves, perhaps too, of wanting to procreate, of wanting to put children in this world, a world that might have even more quote unquote suffering than usual in the way that it's about to collapse. Yet the focus is very, very much on birth, on, oh, wow, how wonderful. Yes, I want to have children. That's a beautiful thing. Rather than, well, actually putting children here in this world comes with a lot of different side effects, right? So this is not a guilt trip. Don't take it as a guilt trip if you've decided to have children, but rather as a reflection to be quite honest with oneself and really go, wow, there's a strong tendency in the mind to overlook at these things. To just focus on the sort of glitter, on the pretty side of it, without actually taking into consideration or putting enough contemplation on the drawbacks of what we think, of what we crave, right? And what we like. And actually, I wanted to quote, there is a beautiful, an entire actually discourse from Ajahn Chah. For those who have not read this book, PSA, you should read it. It's a collection of discourses from Ajahn Chah. Honestly, anything Ajahn Chah you should read, but this was one of the first books I read, and this discourse I remember really made an impact in my mind, and it's called Our Real Home. It's the second discourse on that is collected in this book, Still Flowing Water, and it's fundamentally a discourse that is given by Ajahn Chah to a lady who is about to die on her deathbed. And it's peculiar in a way because actually he was invited to say a few last words to this woman. And they were expecting that Ajahn Chah would just say some comforting words for her to have a nice sort of transition and kind of feel good sort of Dhamma. And actually, it is feel good, but in a different way. It is an incredibly long discourse, actually, pretty lengthy Dhamma talk, which is why I was like, I wish I could just read this from the beginning to the end. But unfortunately, we have some time constraints. But it's so rich of what it really means to die and what it really means to be born. So I have just a little excerpt here in that is particularly related to the sort of the celebration of birth rather than death. And he says, talking to this woman about to die, it's kind of funny, you know? We human beings, when somebody dies, get all sad and upset. We cry and grieve, all kinds of things. It's delusion. It's delusion, you know, to cry and lament when somebody dies. That's the way we've been since who knows when. We hardly ever reflect to see things clearly. In my opinion, and you'll have to forgive me for saying this, but if you're going to cry when somebody dies, it'd be better to cry when somebody's born. But we have things all backwards. If somebody's born, we laugh, we're happy and glad. But really, birth is death, and death is birth. The beginning is the end, and the end is the beginning. When someone dies or is about to die, we cry. That's foolishness. If you're going to cry, it'd be better to cry from the very beginning. For birth is death. Without birth, there's no death. Do you understand? Death is birth, and birth is death. I love Ajahn Chah because he's just like the Buddha. Whenever he speaks, I never met him in person, but it's such an incredible gift to have all these actually transcriptions of discourses. It's not that he sat down and he wrote a book, but rather you see also the level of repetition in this caption. He says the same thing basically over and over again, with the intention for us to kind of grasp it, to see it. And when we reflect actually on our experience, there are certain times when we really do get it. We really do get this birth is death and death is birth. And we don't get it, unfortunately, on our personal experience, but we do get it sometimes partially in our experience of the world. So now it's starting to get colder here in New Jersey. in the United States, and we see the leaves falling from the trees. We're immersed in death. Soon all the leaves will be on the ground, and then in the spring, new leaves will bloom. And it's normally such a beautiful event, actually, here in this part of the country. A lot of people go upstate, go outside of the city to enjoy the beautiful colors of death, actually. And so we're not indifferent to it. We're not like, oh, well, that's just what is happening. But we're fully understanding. We're understanding the process of birth and death, birth and death. And we celebrate death more than we celebrate birth in a way. Or equally. There is some excitement too, sometimes in the spring, but it's of a different kind. But besides our emotional sort of state, there is, I would say, the mind is peaceful when it relates to the event of birth and death in nature. We fully understand it. And how beautiful would that be to actually fully understand it in the human experience? We can see how having a clear understanding of that process can bring peace that can even go to the level of happiness and celebration for something so, further apart from what we think that can be celebrated in general, which is death. And not celebrating it in terms of a creepy way, like, yay, we got rid of like such and such person. That's not what we're trying to say here. But rather looking at ourselves, at our grasping, at our attachment to this physical body, to identifying with who we are, that this is me, this is who I am. But rather seeing it no different than a leaf that is about to die. It doesn't belong to us. We can't really do much with it. We can't, I can't go like, boom, turn into when you're 15. No. Or boom, become 80. No. Won't do anything that I wanted to do. I can somewhat affect it, bring it into a sort of direction, but it doesn't belong to me ultimately. Excuse me. And so from here we see that then Bhikkhuni Cālā also answers the second part of the question from Māra. Who persuaded you of this? Had asked Māra. And Cālā replies, the Buddha has taught the Dhamma, the transcendence of birth. For the abandoning of all suffering, he has settled me in the truth. And this, in a nutshell, it's what we're doing here. In a nutshell, this is the incredible compassion of the Buddha, the Sammasambuddha that comes here for the welfare of all beings. And out of compassion, shows us the way, teaches us the Dhamma, which is another way of saying the truth, fundamentally. Sometimes we tend to think of the Dhamma because it's in the realm of religion and because you see monks and we're in a monastery, empty cloud, and it's the fourth religion in the world, Buddhism, or something like that. We tend to think of it in terms of mystical stuff that is either we believe in it or we don't believe in it. But rather what we're talking about here is truth. So the Four Noble Truths, over and over again, it's emphasized in the suttas. So it's kind of universal laws. So whether we're aware of it or we're not aware of it, it still applies, no different than the law of gravity. Whether we decide to believe in the law of gravity or we don't believe in the law of gravity, we'll still be receiving sort of the consequences of the law of gravity. If a brick falls from the top of this building and we're underneath it, we'll be hit by the brick, whether or not we believe in the law of gravity, in the truth of gravity. So it's the same with the mind. It's the same with our experience of the world. It's the same with our emotions. It's the same with pretty much the human experience. Most of the time, if we really look at our experience through the lenses of Dhamma, we see that it's caused by ignorance, by ignoring these principles, these laws that the Buddha outlines for us. And it ultimately then boils down to transcending birth. But transcending birth does not mean like going into a weird place. It's not going into a sort of pseudo paradise like the Buddhist paradise that then you disappear from the world and you have no connection altogether with the world of samsara. But rather, it's transcending ignorance. It's transcending this constant birth and rebirth, just as we see it in nature around us. We tend to think, for example, that YOLO in our life, in our experience, YOLO, like once this body is away, we're done with it. But in reality, we're no different than a tree with its leaves. So we're constantly doing the same exact thing. And each time we think it's marvelous. How many falls have we seen? How many springs have we seen? Oh, lovely, it's spring. Oh, lovely, it's fall. Oh, lovely, it's spring. Oh, lovely, it's fall. Over and over and over again. But in between, there's a pandemic. In between, there's people we love and care about dying. In between, we lose jobs. In between, we lose anything. We lose health. In between, we age. In between, there's decrepitude. In between, there's murder. In between, there's all that big, massive suffering. But we're having a great, going and over again in this cycle. And the Buddha basically shows us a different way. A way that it's not what we normally think is the way. We normally think, I'm experiencing suffering. So where is the best way out in the way of sensual pleasure? How can I have a pleasant experience that will take me away from this unpleasant experience? So if we're dissatisfied, we open the fridge and try to stuff our face with anything that has possibly a good sugar content or perhaps a nice salty content if we feel like savory food. Or if it's grief, we try to put a big dose of suppression and try to distract ourselves as much as possible, perhaps ingurgitating huge amounts of entertainment so we don't have to deal with our emotional state. Whatever it is that we're experiencing, if it's depression, you name it, any kind of emotional state, we have a very hard time dealing with it. And we look for a way out, we think, but in reality it's basically, once again, getting the cycle back on. So the natural instinctive way out is a pleasant feeling. But the Buddha tells us, no, it didn't work since beginningless time. Why do you repeat the same pattern over and over again? Actually, if anything, at best it doesn't solve the problem, and at worst, it actually makes the problem worse because we keep on, fueling our addiction. No different than, once again, any type of substance addiction. It's the same thing. The pattern is the same. It's just that in our culture, we like to put certain addictions into a category of socially unacceptable, and others they're socially acceptable. There's not that much different. The pattern, mental pattern, is the same. Constant searching for a high, something that distracts us from our dukkha, from the First Noble Truth. And so the Buddha points out to a different way out, which is a way that transcends suffering, transcends birth and death, brings just a cessation of all of this. And instead of acquiring a sort of state of existence, is letting go of all craving for any state of existence. It's what we call here JOMO, the joy of missing out. Letting it all go. Stop wanting to control every single thing. Stop wanting to control our physical appearance, for example, preventing it from aging, but just understanding that the body is subject to aging. Instead of going through plastic surgery, trying to, when hair falls out, we start transplanting follicles in our head to make sure that the people around us think that we still have hair, and most importantly, ourselves. So trying to stop the time to actually, like it never was before, really, and because probably we're losing hair since the very beginning. Or wrinkles, Botoxing ourselves, since trying to pretend that we're still 12, but in reality we actually look 95 at the age of 24 because we put so much Botox that we can't move. So it's such a bizarre tendency of mind, right? So instead of keeping on going that, we transcend all of that and we become understanding. We cultivate that awareness that we have with the phases of nature without that craving of wanting for it to repeat over and over again. And that's where we see, for the abandoning of all suffering, as Ajahn Chah's famous quote that we like to say a lot here is, if you let go a little, you get a little bit of peace. If you can let go of a lot, you get a lot of peace. And if you let go completely, you get complete peace. It's pretty great. Sign me up for that. Right? So we don't have to wait even till full enlightenment to see, to taste the truth of the Dhamma. Just like we don't have to become, Einstein to understand the law of gravity, to understand physics. We can taste it. We can have a sort of immediate experiential understanding, which then builds faith and confidence in us to really see how this path is completely feasible. It's possible. And it's possible in this lifetime if we really commit to it. If we really follow the teachings. It's absolutely feasible. The only obstructions that there are in our mind. We create them. It's our attachments. But even if we let go a little bit, we can create the imprint. We can have a little bit of peace. We can savor truth. We can have an appreciation for truth, and that will propel us regardless in the good general direction. And then Bhikkhuni Cālā continues, as to those beings who fare amidst form and those who abide in the formless, not having understood cessation, they come again to renewed existence. And so she ends fundamentally saying how there is not a dramatic difference between those who have form, so us, carrying this bag of feces, mucus, and bile and whatnot, Venerable Pamuto has this really nice booklet in his room that Bhakti Subhasu and I were reading the other day, that it's actually a very concise booklet on how this machine works. And it's incredibly disgusting, actually. Incredibly complicated, complex, and disgusting. Without even getting to the chapter of diseases, actually. It was just like by seeing how it works on a regular basis, we were going through it like, oh my, yeah, it's evil. Like, it's terrible. And then you go to the possible diseases and imperfections, which will happen to each one of us because we're subject to sickness. So the machine gets faulty. It's kind of like the computer. We get it, it's great, and we're like, oh, it's gonna last like this forever. And then bam, you download an update from Apple, automatically, bam, the computer doesn't work anymore, or the iPhone doesn't work anymore, right? It's the same. Except that we're constantly having updates. And and then you get to these other chapters that are even more gross. So then we tend to think, oh, if only I didn't have to deal with this body. If I were only pure mind, like those devas. There's also a great deva that I always liked, which is the sleeping deva that spends eons just relaxing. Bhante say, no. And we're like, oh yeah, I could take a break. That would be nice. Just relax a little bit, like snuggling. That's really like happy. And she says, no. Trisha is not. No. Doesn't matter if you're a supreme deva, if you're one of the gods, or if you're one of the humans, or if you're a cat, if you're a ghost. Whatever state of existence you are, if you have not understood this principle, if you don't understand cessation, if you don't understand death, and consequently birth, you will come again to renewed existence. You will come again to rebirth. You will be reborn over and over again. And the cycle continues over and over again, spinning around and around and around and around. And each time thinking, wow, this is so unique. This is so special. This is so incredible. Oh, how many things can I do in the world? I remember when I was 19, after high school, I had to decide what to do with my life. I remember compiling this long list because there was not one thing that I wanted to do. So there was this incredible list, actually, when I was 18, because it was when I was 19 that I had to then study whatever I had to study. It was so incredibly long. From being a bartender around the world to a doctor, going about a lawyer, going about a fashion editor, going about like an artist, going to... I was like, oh, there's so many things. Then at a certain point I contemplate, maybe I'll be an actor so I can actually be each one of these things for short periods of time and I don't have to pick. I really contemplated that. I remember vividly. And that's basically what we do. Even if I decided not to get into acting, an acting career, that's fundamentally what we've all been doing for countless lifetimes. We're just actors impersonating certain realms of existence. Sometimes we have families, sometimes we're single, sometimes we're monks, sometimes we're lay people, sometimes we are grandparents, sometimes we're just children, sometimes we're Indian, sometimes we're Italian, sometimes we're Jamaican, sometimes we're American, sometimes we're neither of these. We live in like an entirely different planet in a different state of existence. Sometimes we're a cat, sometimes we're a chicken, sometimes we're a fox, sometimes we're a hungry ghost, sometimes we're in the deva world, sometimes we're a delusional god, sometimes we're a very wise god. You name it. Endless realms of existence. And they're all ultimately unsatisfying. which is what propelled through that craving of always wanting to be an actor, we come back into renewed existence. And that's the preciousness of the Buddhist teachings. They're the only way out of this, the only solution to ending right here, right now, the conditions for suffering, the cause of suffering. And once we realize this, then Māra also realizes, they see me. The Bhikkhuni Cālā sees me, the Bhikkhuni Soma sees me, Bhikkhu Sudaso sees me, Samanera Sumana sees me, Bhikkhu Pamuto sees me, Bhikkhu Jayasara sees me, Antoinette sees me, Antoinette sees me, soon to be Anagarika Antoinette sees me, soon to be Bhikkhuni Antoinette sees me. And Māra disappears right there because there is no conditions in our mind for Māra to have a place. And also the sort of figure of Māra just goes, yeah, there's nobody has time for me here, apparently. Better go around the block and see if I have better fortune over there. All right, so I think that's all I have to share for this morning. If people have any thoughts and comments to share, they're welcome to put them in the live chat. All right.
Thank you, Ayya Soma. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And there's a couple of comments and questions, and also welcome to some more friends joining in, including Michael and Shadow of Label. And Gita says, Ayya, birth gives one the opportunity to escape this massive cycle of suffering. If there's no birth, there's no death. Bliss of Nibbana. And then she also says, in Mahayana, don't the bodhisattvas return to help others escape the cycle of suffering?
So I'm not the best person to ask about Mahayana questions because I've not been trained in that. What I do have a bodhisattva vow. I didn't formally take it, but as I took it as a means to an end, which is actually how it was taught to me by some senior bhikkhunis, actually, in the Mahayana tradition, in the Chan tradition. So that it's not necessarily, and this obviously I'm not speaking on behalf of the entire Mahayana tradition, or on that particular tradition, which is why I'm not naming it, because I don't know what their particular stance is on the matter. But these particular bhikshunis were saying how it was fundamentally an aid in the path. So if you think about yourself, for example, in the morning, actually this morning, I woke up, or better, the alarm clock went off. I didn't wake up naturally. I was really tired. And I was like, oh, snooze, snooze, snooze. Probably Antoinette might have heard my snooze because our room is kind of close by. And I just kept on going, do, 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 do. 5 minutes, do, 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 do. 5 minutes, do, 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 do. 5 minutes. I did that for like 20 minutes. And I really didn't want to get out of bed. Now, had I been alone as a lay person, I would have gone, maybe meditation this morning can wait for another half hour, perhaps an hour, perhaps 2 hours. Oh, maybe I can wait until the evening. Or maybe like tomorrow, or maybe next week. So if it becomes just something that we do, if this practice only becomes something that we do for ourselves to escape, to put an end to suffering, we can become a little bit is self-indulgent the right word? I don't remember what self-indulgent. Yes, approved. And not really put too much effort into it. So we use a lot of aids in the path. And a lot of times actually caring for others is a stronger reason, a stronger motivation than just caring for ourselves. And even better, this is what does it for me, is caring for myself and others. So not like transcending also the sort of martyr syndrome, but really seeing that taking, the commitment to help others does include yourself. And then you're like, well, if I don't show up at meditation, then this will also create the conditions for Bhante Suddazo maybe tomorrow not to want to show up at meditation, or Bhante Soma not to want to show up at meditation, Bhante Pamutta not to want to show up at meditation, Bhante Jay not to want to show up at meditation, Antoinette not to want to show up at meditation, and whatnot. So living in community at a monastery is extremely powerful because we see how every single of our action affects others and how others affect ourselves. So when we take a vow of really committing to this path for the benefit of ourselves and others, then we also start flowing like a river and disintegrating the differences. Going, well, I have become a little bit too aversive, because actually now Bhante Sumano has a bit of strong aversive tendencies that he didn't have before. Let me watch out. So Bhante Sumano becomes a mirror of myself, right? And perhaps Bhante Sumano sees that in me as well, goes, oh, I don't know. What do you see? I have no idea because I can't see myself. I'm oblivious. Body. Greed. Oh, oh yeah. Ayya Soma has started getting a lot into artwork because he brought all his cool stuff from his previous life within this life. So that's getting Ayya Soma more interested, etc. So we start noticing our effect. So we make that resolution, then it becomes a means to an end where we're all supporting each other, and it propels us towards awakening. So whether we, are taking it literal or as a means to an end, fundamentally the path is the same. It's going towards awakening. And your question was that people take the vow to be reborn in this world, correct? Well, also there, not necessarily I see it as an obstacle towards awakening, because it's not just to be reborn and to indulge in it's kind of like if tomorrow I'm like, okay, this is too difficult. How about I just go to Italy and start drinking wine with my friends and having a lot of pasta, by the sea, like I used to, that scialatielli with the sea mussels. I used to love that. And whatever, I just smoke cigarettes like I used to and just hang out in a beautiful place in the Amalfi Coast and whatever. And that basically just propels me to get back into the wheel of samsara and go actually eventually into a bad destination, if not immediately, because I'm cultivating greed, hatred, and delusion, just like I was cultivating greed, hatred, and delusion before starting this path. But rather, when one commits literally to the bodhisattva path, they are actually committing to be reborn in a particular state and condition. Actually, Bhante Suddazo gave a very good talk last night that really talks about those aspirations that we can make. And that's basically fundamentally saying, may I have always the right conditions for practice, whether it's in this time or in future lifetimes. And future lifetimes, fundamentally, it's not, if we think that that is a literal, exclusive way of the Mahayana path, are we saying that there are no enlightened beings in Mahayana? Makes no sense. Are none of the patriarchs enlightened? No one? I don't think so. So clearly, I don't know exactly the characteristics, but the particular whatever philosophical stances. But fundamentally, we're all trying to do the same thing. We're all trying to awaken. And those shapes and forms are going to be slightly different according to our vows. Perhaps they will have an influence, but fundamentally it will happen when it will happen, when the conditions will be right. So do whatever works within the frames of Dhamma, within the container of Dhamma. So not aspiring to be a pluri-homicide and not aspiring to be reborn as like pluri-homicidal, serial killer. There you go. I saw like sometimes my Italian-English goes a little bit deranged. So I saw all of a sudden my fellow monastics going like. So that is not a good aspiration, to be reborn as a serial killer, not to be, also not to be reborn as a politician, actually, to be quite frank. That is really not a good aspiration, because inevitably you're going to harm people while you're also perhaps benefiting them. But it's a very controversial state of being. So always, if you have to have an aspiration, for it to be grounded in Dhamma. And then it's a safe bet, and that will transcend then the endless cycle of birth and death.
All right. And Michael asks or says, Ayya, you beautifully explained the sutta. In regard to it, I've wondered about the desire to be born into a good realm, a good birth. Isn't this antithetical to the Buddha's teaching?
I wouldn't say it's antithetical, like as in, because fundamentally, at least how I see it, the Buddhist teachings are teachings of causality. So understanding that certain actions will lead to certain results. So, for example, making a lot of meritorious deeds will propel you to an equivalent of heaven, fundamentally like a sort of heavenly realm, is still in accordance with Dhamma, because it's a natural law fundamentally. But having that particular aspiration is a waste of time, because it won't, as I see it, it won't really bring an end to suffering, right? Because eventually then your karma, your good karma will run out. And with your good karma, also your good vipaka will run out. So the results of karma. And then you're like, woo, I was in heaven realm and now I'm in a hell realm. And then good luck with that. Then it will have to be, a little bit more challenging. Perhaps then at a certain point in the best case scenario, you will be a monastery cat named Stan. And you'll have access to a lot of Dhamma that you can't really understand, but you're kind of absorbing a little bit in the atmosphere. But then you'll also have to go through a lot of suffering to exhaust your bad karma, perhaps by developing an interesting skin allergy that makes you go through a lot of suffering. So you have to go through a lot of suffering then to have the great conditions to be reborn in a better state, possibly the human realm, where even there, good luck with that, because then you're going to have a lot of different opportunities to enjoy sensual pleasure, which then might distract you from the path, and then you're back into the hell realms and boom, going back there, and then you go back to the human realm eventually, and then you make so much merit, and you go again into the heaven realms, and then bam, we go again and again. But understanding causality is very important. Understanding this leads to that destination is good. That's part of right view. The Buddha is very clear. He says it numerous times over and over again, that having an understanding of different realms of existence and what are the conditions that lead to those realms of existence is all within right view, what we need to develop. The first sort of factor of the Noble Eightfold Path.
Thank you. And Michael also says, trying to look forever young is very sad. Nonetheless, we'll die. So, fighting against the inevitable is sad. and the need to stay young is maybe a Western thing. So we need the Buddha's teaching here for that reason alone.
I wouldn't say it's a Western thing. I would say it's a human thing. Actually, in Korea, they have a really severely bad problem of plastic surgery. If you look at Miss Korea 2019, I don't know if they have the 2020 given the pandemic, but 2019, you're like, you just can't see any difference between people. A Korean friend of mine was telling me how difficult it is to even find a job these days in Korea if you don't do plastic surgery, because there is a standard. Unless you do your nose in a particular way, if you do your mouth in a particular way, they won't employ you. So you're actually forced to get into the sort of train of plastic surgery. There was a director. This was from my previous life within this lifetime when I was had a lot of different friends who were in the creative arts. This director who was trying to do a movie that was based in Korea, like in the past, and couldn't find anyone who looked Korean. So what he was trying to do was actually to find actors of Korean descent who had immigrated to other countries like the United States. So like the Korean community in America. So like immigrants who have had children that actually still had the physical characteristics of Korean people in order to have a sort of good, tangible representation of what it looks like to be Korean. So I wouldn't say, a lot of times we tend to be very self-centered actually, and this applies both to Westerners and Easterns or Northerners and Southerners, whatever it is. So we see the world through the lenses of our culture, and for both the good and the bad side. So we can either go to the extreme of like Western culture is the best culture, or the other extreme, Western culture is the worst culture. So like we are the only superficial, we are the only one obsessed with old age, sickness, and death. Everybody else is so great. No, I will say that Eastern spirituality is pretty great, but the defilements are pretty not great everywhere in all the continents that I've been in and all the different cultures that I've been in. So they are universal. That's why actually the teachings, the Dhamma, is so relevant to anyone. It doesn't matter whether we were born Buddhist or not born Buddhist, if we're born in Europe, the United States, or Asia, or Australia, or Africa, or Antarctica, whatever it is. Are people born in Antarctica? I don't know. No. Tell me no. So point being is that it's universal. And those tendencies, we have to look into our mind, even if we think they're not there, even if we think that we're not obsessed with old age, sickness, and death. Actually, we are. It's just the amount of extent to which we are that is worth noting and eradicating and eliminating. And then when we're fully enlightened, we won't have any trace, which that would be great.
Thank you. And Yen says, I like this sutta. Thank you for your teaching, Ayya. Bringing children into this world has always been curious to me. I encourage those who are able to foster, adopt, or support the numerous children in the foster care system. There are lots of kids in a system that needs support. I was very fortunate to adopt my son, who grew up in the foster care system.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Oh, rejoice in your own goodness. Yes, actually, had I not been a monastic, that was my aspiration, not to have biological children, but to actually adopt children. And that is actually in the Buddhist, I will say my Buddhist perspective, not the absolute Buddhist perspective. I'm pretty sure other monastics, other venerables will have other opinions on the subject matter. But that is an incredible way to practice metta, like real metta, real unconditional love. Is to actually adopt someone, take care of someone, where there's no weird, abstruse idea that it's like a photocopy of yourself just because like there's some genes that are similar or whatever, like idea, or that you're going to become immortal. Like there's so many like wrong views actually that come with procreating. And also a lot of attachments that come from those wrong views, that thinking that because one is the extension of yourself, they have to actually have your same aspirations and your same sort of ideas and wants in life, or there's too much of a baggage. But actually, if someone is already not biologically related to you, I think it creates the conditions for real unconditional love to be practiced and generated. So sadhu, sadhu, sadhu for you to really practice this way.
And Laura says, thank you, Ayya Soma. How do you come up with all these great ideas for talks?
Oh, the Pali Canon. It's right here.
Well, one
right
part.
there. Right there. Fundamentally, you just open it up and it's full of Dhamma. So the Buddha was so kind and compassionate to really teach us in so many different shapes and forms. So with the, aspiration for us to eventually get it. And that's what we're trying to do.
Great. So that was the final question. So thanks everyone for joining in. Thank you, Ayya Soma, for sharing your time and teachings with us. And tonight we'll have another talk at 7:30, and then tomorrow morning Sutta study, and then monk chat in the evening tomorrow. So join us then if you can, and we can end with 3 sadhus.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
And have a great